What politicians often don't tell you, and which is common in the political arena, is that just about every politician has two plans. The plan that they tell you, and then the plan that they will execute when they get in power. Now, let me tell you why they have to do that. I'm not saying they have to do it, but let me tell you why they do it. Because in a democracy, if you tell people the truth, they don't vote for you. So many times you will hear a politician say, "This is my plan," but it's not really his plan. You're going to hear the plan after he gets elected. The more critical the project or event, the more essential the plan is. I remember I had what is called a planning epiphany. And this planning epiphany occurred when I was taking a flight. One morning I got up to take a flight right here in Nassau. I was flying on Bahamas Air. And I got to the airport late, and the flight was full. And they said there were no more seats. But I happened to know the pilot. He actually may be in this room today. But I spoke to the pilot, and the pilot said, "Okay, well, you can join me in the cockpit." That was before 9/11, of course. And so I went into the cockpit, and as I was sitting in the cockpit, I got the shock of my life when I realized exactly what pilots do. And let me tell you a little bit about what they do. This picture shows two pilots sitting down with a clipboard in their hand. And this is what happens prior to a flight taking place. Every pilot has to have a flight plan. The flight plan, I was listening to my friend talk to the co-pilot. He was the pilot. He was talking to the co-pilot, and he said, "Flaps." And the co-pilot said, "Check." He said, one other instrument, I don't remember what the name of it is, but he started calling out a list of instruments and parts of the plane, and the pilot said, and the co-pilot said, "Check, check, check, check." So I asked my friend, I said, "Do you do that before every flight?" He said, "We can't leave the gate without doing that." Because you see, this flight is critical. It has humans on board, and humans are the most valuable cargo, so you can't leave the gate guessing. You cannot leave the ground without the flight plan. Guess what? The tower won't clear you to leave unless the flight plan is submitted. What does the flight plan include? The flight plan includes a destination. You got to know where you're going. You don't go to the airport and then the pilot says, "Well, we're not exactly sure where we're going today." How many of you would get on a flight if the pilot says, "Well, I think we are going to New York"? So you have to have a destination. And the flight plan also tells you, they said you have to give the number of people on board, the exact number. Because they need to know exactly who's on board, especially in today's world with terrorism and all the other things. But they have to know who's there. If something does happen, they have to know who to contact. That's why they get information from you. Another thing that's interesting about a flight plan is the flight plan, you have to determine ahead of time what is the speed you're going to use and what altitude you're going to fly at. Another thing that's interesting that I learned from that experience is that in the air, you don't fly on a straight line. They have roads in the sky. You think that you go directly from Nassau to New York. No, there are routes. And it's planned. So you could actually start out like this, go this way, and come back over here. Why? Because if they don't have routes in the sky, people will run into each other. Another thing that I noticed about the flight plan is the flight plan gives you the speed, altitude, all of these things. But the flight plan also includes alternate routes. You have to have an alternate route before you leave the ground in case of bad weather. You have to know which airport to land in if things don't go right. And guess what? If you are flying at 30,000 feet, you have to get permission to change altitude. Why? Because there may be another plane at 25,000 feet. And so this was my great lesson on the value of planning. The cargo is too important to be left up to chance. And when you look at yourself individually, think of yourself as that cargo. You are too important to leave your life up to chance. I want to talk to you about some other plans. I'm a businessman. One of the things that I've done in my life for several years, I ran an organization called the Small Business Center. So I was responsible for helping people develop business plans. And I had to put everything in place. And you don't go into a bank and say, I'm going to start a business. When you enter the bank, you have to present a business plan. Nobody's going to give you money unless you have a plan. You would be amazed at how many things in life we don't plan. And I'm going to list some of them in a minute. But you have to have, when you're going into business, you have to have a business plan. And here's something interesting about business that I learned. 85% of businesses with a plan fail. 85% that have a plan will fail. But here's the good news. After you've lost all your money, they say second businesses are much more successful than the first one. Because you've learned some lessons along the way. I actually, I'm writing a book, but I have it on CD and DVD. If you're interested in developing a business plan, I have a series that I did called Starting a Business and Maximizing Technology. It's available on the outside if you are interested in going into business, because it details what's involved in a business plan. Here's another type of plan. Another type of plan is an information technology plan. Most companies don't have an information technology plan. And what I've learned over the years is that a lot of people end up spending too much money on the computer, or they have the wrong network because they didn't have an information technology plan. Let me tell you one little secret about an information technology plan. Always buy your software first. Because your software is the instrument that's going to run your business, not the hardware. The hardware is going to accommodate the vehicle that runs your business. Another type of plan is a marketing plan. Then you have the medical insurance plan. We make decisions based upon reviewing plans. Here's another one that's really important. A building plan. In order for you to build a building, you have to get permission. Your plans have to be approved. Can you imagine showing up on site to a building with all the equipment and no plan? You know what happens? You end up with the kitchen in the bathroom, or the toilet in the kitchen. And you know, that's what's happening in our world today. The toilet is in the kitchen. That's what same-sex marriage is. The toilet is in the kitchen. Location is determined by the plan. You put things in the right location based upon the plan. Let me give you an example. Do you know why God placed your nose here? Because if He put it on top of here, when it rains, you'll drown. Here's another type of plan that's important. Family plan. Most families are unplanned. Most marriages are unplanned. Do you realize that you have more requirements to get a driver's license than you do to get a marriage license? In order to get a driver's license, you have to do theory, and then you have to actually take a test. In order to get married, all you have to do is be able to stand up straight and say, I do. But a family is the most important institution of all. This is my family. My daughter is here with me, and my wife is here as well. And I planned to have a successful family. Now, one of the reasons why I planned to have a successful family is because of things that happened to me. But it didn't happen because of my upbringing or circumstances. I had a difficult upbringing. Not that we were uncomfortable financially. It's just that our family was not in order. But I made a promise to myself that I would not repeat what my father did. But I didn't make that promise until I straightened out my life and developed a plan. When I was growing up, I didn't have a plan. Well, I had a plan, but it wasn't the normal kind of plan. I'll tell you a little bit about my plan. One of the things that I did with my family after I corrected my situation was I instituted family devotions. Why? Because we have to have a spiritual foundation. And then I instituted family meetings. Every few weeks or every month, we would have a family meeting and review everybody from there with little children. And many times in those meetings, I would give speeches. One of my speeches to my family when they were young, my children, I said to them, I want to tell you something. Here's the plan. None of you will ever have to use drugs or alcohol because I already use enough for the whole family. And I remember one time I gave a speech to my son, and I said, he was about 6 or 7 years old, and I said, son, I'm going out of town. I said, but while I'm gone, you're in charge. So when I came home, I saw that his face was a little despondent. And so I inquired as to what happened. And then I got the explanation. When I left, he went to my wife and he said, you know, Daddy left me in charge. Sometimes you got to give the right instructions. Plans do not guarantee success, but they significantly increase the odds. And then another type of plan is the national plan, which is the most difficult type of planning because when you are planning in a democracy, again, the people who you have to tell the truth to may have to vote for you. So, you know, I've never heard a politician on the campaign trail say this. So, you know, Brother Larry, let me tell you my plan. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to fire you because we can't afford you. But you're a voter. So I can't tell you that. I mean, if you are honest, you can. But it's kind of difficult. You have to be, I guess, creative in your enunciation of your plan. That's why it's important to do research on politicians, because politicians say a lot of things, but you have to check their history. Here's another type of plan that's important, generational plan. One of the things that I've concentrated on is working with youth, and I'll explain it in a moment. But you see, we cannot wait until the generation arrives or matures to have a plan in place for them. I want to tell you something, and this is the truth, and I don't say it derogatorily, but the body of Christ or the church is being obliterated when it comes to young people. We are not even in the youth culture. We don't put resources in it. We don't really have a lot of plans. Youth ministry and children's ministry, you don't have a lot of people who are dedicated to that area. That's why I'm a youth ministry specialist, because it's my assignment. Young people should be able to walk into a plan. A leader is naked without a plan. A leader without a plan is called indecent exposure. The emperor has no clothes. You should never go out in public without a plan. Planning provides direction. Planning is like a GPS. I remember a few years ago, I was in Chicago with my wife. We went to see a business associate. And while we were in Chicago, I rented a GPS because I didn't know exactly where I was going. And we started driving down the highway. And as we were driving, we hit a bump. And the GPS stopped talking. So I didn't know where to go. And I didn't have the number for the company. And so I was lost temporarily. But you see, a plan is like a GPS. It tells you where the points are. It tells you where to turn. It tells you where not to turn. Fortunately for me, the GPS came back on, and I was able to get to my destiny. The greatest need of people in the world today and in every day is direction. When you enter a new city and you're not familiar with the surroundings, you need direction. That's what young people need. Young people need to know where to go. And the problem is that today the wrong people are directing them. That's why we need access to them. The process of planning. Now let's talk about the steps of effective planning. The first step is vision. And I don't have to say a lot about vision because we have one of the greatest visionaries in the world right here. You know what was interesting about Dr. Monroe? From the time he was a little boy, he had a vision. Who names a music group that plays R&B and rock the Visionaires? You know, you figure you would come up with a cool name, like Kool and the Gang or something like that. But he named the group the Visionaires. So he was a visionary from a very young age. You have to have a vision or be a part of a vision that you are entrusted with. That's the first step in planning. I remember when we started Bahamas Faith Ministries, Dr. Monroe got a group of us together, and he showed us the plan. He had a plan already written on paper. And it's not a coincidence that you are successful when you have plans. And he enunciated to us something that was unfamiliar to the Bahamas at that time. He talked about not just having a church, because we had a lot of churches. And the first lawyer that we had as a company, as a corporation, we had to fire him. We had to get rid of the lawyer because the lawyer didn't understand what we were trying to do. So you have to have a written vision. Remember that vision is destination. Vision begins with discovering your personal destiny. This is a photo of me, and this is also a book that I wrote called The Power of Positive Choices, and I talk about the lessons of my life. Because you see, I grew up in a middle-class family. In fact, you could probably consider my family rich. My father owned a boat, a plane, 3 grocery stores. We were doing all right. But you see, the problem with me was that I wasn't born in the ghetto, but the ghetto was born in me. Dr. Monroe mentions many times that he was born in Baintown. I wasn't born in Baintown, but the problem is that Baintown was born in me. So when he was around the corner singing his songs and all of that type of stuff, I was breaking into people's cars or doing whatever else I needed to do. And I almost didn't get to my destiny because I didn't have a plan. So I was operating by other people's plans. I became a drug dealer at 13 years old. Some people ask me, well, why are you a businessman today? I said I was always a businessman. At the age of 13, I was into pharmaceuticals. I used to buy low and sell high. But you see, I had a strategic meeting. I remember while I was in the Bahamas, when I was 13, I was a drug dealer. When I was 14, I assaulted a teacher. They threw me out of school. When I was 15, I assaulted my own father, got thrown out of my house. When I was 17, I led the police on a high-speed chase. When I was 19, I was in college, and I was still engaging in my enterprise while in college. And so I decided that I needed a gun. And me and a friend of mine, we saw a truck pull into the complex where we were living with three guns. So we was like, man, this is Christmas. And we ended up stealing the gun. But I got caught, and I was facing 3 years in prison. My sister was attending Oral Roberts University, and she said to me, you need to come here. Now, I didn't qualify because when I went to apply to Oral Roberts University, they said, have you ever done drugs? I said, no. Are you sexually active? No. Are you a churchgoer? Yes. I hadn't been to church in at least 5 years. But you know, my mother was so intent on me getting to Oral Roberts University because she was like, man, I need to get him there. She found a pastor who knew me when I was like that big. And she said, I need you to write a reference for my son. And I got in. Only God could have done it because I don't know how it happened. But when I got there, I met Dr. Monroe. And even then he had a plan. And he encouraged me in a number of areas. And that was one of the things that caused me to change my direction. Sometimes you need a change of location. Sometimes you need exposure to visionaries. You see, that exposure changed my destiny. And that's why I am bound to change the destiny of others. That's why I work with young people. It's my assignment. So who am I today? Because we're talking about the steps in planning. The first step is vision. So I had to identify who I was. And I discovered who I am and where I'm supposed to be going. I actually have a plan already written out for the rest of my life. And my plan is based around indicators and assignment. Every one of us, we have indicators. Your talents, your gifts, and your abilities are indicators. Dr. Monroe mentioned that your passion is an indicator. What you are angry about is an indicator. And so I discovered who I am. And when I discovered who I am, I realized that I'm two things. First of all, I'm a youth and family specialist. I care about family. I care about young people. And it's by design. A lot of times people come up to me and they say, well, Pastor Dave, you still doing youth ministry? I said, I didn't decide to do this because I didn't have anything else to do. I decided to do this because this is my destiny. This is what I'm supposed to be doing. It's an area that's underrepresented. I also care about family because of what happened to me when I was growing up, and I didn't want to repeat the process. The other thing that I am is I'm a businessman. As I mentioned, I was in business. In fact, most of my family, my uncles, my aunts, my sisters, my brothers, everybody was in business. So it's in my genes. The interesting thing about business is that in business, you have to take risks. But before I talk about risk, let me mention something. One of the things that I learned from Dr. Monroe that I incorporated into my own life is that I came into this vision, and one of the things that he has said many times, he said, you don't employ people, you deploy people. So I was employed for a short period of time, and then I got deployed. And when I got deployed, because I focused in on my assignment and accomplishing my goal, I ended up in so many places that I didn't initially plan on. But now I plan on being places. I've been in many churches. If I mention some of the names in California, I remember I was in a church speaking, and Stevie Wonder came and sat in the front row. And in Hollywood, many different places. I've been in different countries, been training, been consulting. I've consulted for denominations, churches. Why? Because I'm operating in my assignment. I've been deployed. I was employed, but then I got deployed. Your vision has to be told, and it has to be sold. Let me talk a little bit about a personal experience about vision. I was working at Bahamas Faith Ministries, and I began to realize that I needed additional income. And at that time, I had closed one of my businesses because I was in full-time ministry. But then I began to realize that if you are something, it's hard to escape it. And so I went back into business. And when I went back into business, the first year I made like $10,000. The second year was like $90,000. The third year was $100,000. The fourth year was $250,000. When I got to $250,000, I began to realize that I can't operate this myself. So I had to sell the vision to my wife. Now, the only problem with selling the vision to my wife was that my wife was the vice president of the local insurance company that you know worldwide as Travelers Insurance. She had a company car. They would send her on trips. The kids were so happy with the income and everything. We had a family meeting, and in the family meeting, I tried to sell them on my wife taking over the business, even though she didn't have any experience in computers. The first sale didn't go well. She turned it down. But you know what? A few months later, she came back to me and said, I'm ready to do it. And so we ended up, and in the very first year that she took over the business, it went from 250 to 500. Then it went from 500 to 750. Then it went from 900 to 1 million. Then it went from 1 million to 1.2. Then 1.5. Then 2 billion.